Thank you for joining me here today on a Friday evening. I appreciate seeing familiar faces, and I'm really excited to share this with you. The presentation is about my mental health delegation's trip to Palestine, and my hope is through this presentation you'll get an opportunity to feel like you're on the journey with me. Oh, I didn't really introduce myself. So, I'm Shereen Khan-Amrikani. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been practicing for almost 20 years at this point. On a personal level, I'm Pakistani ethnically, and I'm married to a Palestinian American. And so this was also a very personal journey for me because I had the opportunity to visit his homeland, which he himself has not had an opportunity to do so yet. So in April, there was a mental health delegation that consisted of 20 of us, all practitioners from the United States, and our goal was to go to Palestine and to learn and to support educational and advocacy efforts back here in the U.S. We traveled through the West Bank, through East Jerusalem, and other Palestinian cities. And every person who met with us risked their lives and safety to do so. So these are some of the places that we visited. And when you look at this map, you can see that the Gaza Strip is actually quite small. It's only about 2% of the size of the San Francisco Bay Area. And the West Bank is about a third of the size of the San Francisco Bay Area, to offer some context here. So we traveled all through Palestine. These are some of the organizations that we visited, and throughout the presentation, feel free to take pictures of the slides in case you want to contact the organizations or learn more about them. So in order to talk about Palestine, you need to have some understanding of the historical context. It's really critical to know that everything did not start with October 7th. Palestinians have been contending with occupation since 1917 with the Balfour Declaration, in which the British government pledged to support the establishment of a home for the Jewish people of Europe, despite Palestine being populated by over 90% of Palestinian natives at the time. Subsequently, there was the Nakba during 1947 and 1949. And during that period, there were 15,000 Palestinians killed by Zionist militias trained by the British. There were over 530 villages ethnically cleansed, and over 750,000 Palestinians fled or were forcibly displaced. And as you'll see through this presentation, the Nakba is ongoing, and we can see that right now happening in the West Bank and particularly in Gaza. This is a mural at Aida refugee camp. It's a visual representation of how the Nakba has been ongoing, resulting in the occupation of, expansion of occupation over time. In 1967, Israel seized the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, which led to additional displacement. And at that time, Israel also illegally occupied Jerusalem. In 1993, the Oslo Accords were signed, and the West Bank was split into areas A, B, and C, and Palestinians were promised self-governance within a timeline of 5 years, and of course that did not happen, that didn't materialize. And today, Israel is widely known and recognized as an apartheid state. So David Ben-Gurion was Israel's first prime minister, and in 1948, you can see with this quote, he had a very clear intent towards the ethnic cleansing and erasure of the Palestinian people. Which takes me into the term memorycide. Memorycide is the destruction of the memory, extermination of the past of targeted people, destruction of traces that might recall the former presence of those considered undesirable. And in this case, we're talking about the Palestinians that were considered undesirable. And memory-side is used in support of ethnic cleansing. And this is something that we contended with on the delegation. Everywhere we went, we saw these attempts at erasure, and we saw signs of occupation, and occupation that was expanding and intensifying. Ways that, attempts at erasure, we see this through the removal of original city and village names and replacement with Hebrew names. We visited some places, as you'll see, that are now not even found on the map. We visited destroyed villages of the 1948 Nakba, and they were planted over with non-native, flammable European pine trees, and they were redesignated as national parks. And you can also see the centuries-old olive trees are uprooted. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit. I'll play a video about Tantura, which is a fishing village that was destroyed in 1948. This is the parking lot where we parked. There's our bus to come to the beach area, Tantura. And this is the parking lot where it's believed that Israel buried all the bodies of those they murdered in mass graves and cemented over it so that there would be no evidence.
You really have.
And there's the entrance to the beach, which they don't even call Tantura, and it's not on the map anymore. You try to search for it. They call it the Israel Sea Trail. So, as you saw, there were mass graves that were cemented over, and it was used as a parking lot. And the land is now used as a popular beach area, which is really, when we parked there and we walked out, and I realized that this is that parking lot that is covering mass graves, it was just really disgusting. And then when you're looking around and you're seeing all these Israeli families, basically having a day at the beach and enjoying themselves, it was really hard to sit with that. This picture on the bottom left shows a structure, and this is a structure that was built by a Palestinian family prior to the Nakba, and it's one of the last remaining structures there. This family continues to show up on a daily basis to be present in their on their land, and if they did not do so, they would lose the land completely. And there's no electricity, there's no water. This family just continues to show up, and every 2 months they have to go and fight the government to get a permit to sustain it in their name. So it's an ongoing struggle, and this family has been contending with that for generations now. And that is how they show resistance. So if you want to take a picture of this slide, you can. There is a documentary about Tantura, and I would highly recommend it. It goes into interviews of Palestinian witnesses and also Israeli veterans who participated in the Nakba. So additional attempts at erasure. You see in schools that history is rewritten and taught differently. You see that historical and cultural books are also confiscated under false allegations, and it can result in jail time to have certain books. Displaying the Palestinian flag is illegal within Israel, and you can get jailed for it, and people do. Appropriation of Palestinian cuisine as Israeli cuisine is also the norm, and this was something I witnessed in Al Abbasiyah village, which is where my husband is from. And when we stopped there for about 10-15 minutes, and I got to walk the land, I saw these Palestinian office buildings, commercial buildings that they owned, and instead it had become like one of the shops was now an Israeli hummus shop, and it was just mind-boggling to think that this is where my husband's roots stem from, and there's a whole history here that is being ignored and rewritten, and that's colonization for you. At checkpoints, cultural items like the keffiyeh are not allowed. Nationalistic songs, cultural songs, books, none of those items are allowed. And so every time we went through these checkpoints, we had to turn off the music, put away the books or put away any pamphlets. If you have a keychain that has the keffiyeh on it or the Palestinian flag on it, you had to hide it. And it was a very somber experience and highly anxiety-provoking experience every time we went through these checkpoints. And we went through a number of them since we were traveling all through occupied Palestine. In Israel, there's widespread silencing, there's isolation, and Palestinians are accused of disloyalty. And there are arrests of artists and also psychotherapists. And one of the psychotherapists we met with said, even our empathy for Gaza is treated like a threat. And, if you think about it, you can also see parallels between Palestine and what's currently happening here in the United States. This is an image of a settlement being built. And everywhere we went, as we were traveling, we could see these huge cranes. We could see construction underway for settlements. And these settlements come to be with financial incentive and support from the government. So here, you can see one of those being constructed. And since October 7th, settlements have been expanding at an alarming rate in the West Bank and Jerusalem. And of course, they are illegal under international law. This is an entrance to a settlement that we accidentally came across. We weren't trying to head in there, but you can see here that they're a common site. They're heavily guarded with physical barriers. There's lots of surveillance to restrict Palestinians from re-entering their land. In this infographic, you can see various inequalities between a Jewish citizen of Israel born in an Israeli settlement versus a Palestinian ID holder born in a Palestinian village in Area C of the West Bank. Area C constitutes about 60% of the West Bank. And you can see that there's clear discrimination in terms of freedom of movement, obtaining a fair trial, right to free speech, right to protest, and also in terms of building a home. It's very hard to obtain building permits. In this infographic, you can see that there's a clear hierarchy, and at the top there are Jewish Israeli citizens, and at the bottom are the Gaza Strip Palestinians. And below that, there's a sixth group, which is excluded from the Israeli system altogether, which are the 6 million Palestinians in exile due to the Nakba, who are not given any rights or considerations at all. And depending on where you land in this hierarchy, you will have differing rights and access to differing roads and services and voting rights, and also medical care. Archbishop Desmond Tutu said that Israeli apartheid is worse than the apartheid that was in South Africa. And he said, if you're neutral in the situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Here we can see the apartheid wall. It started being built in 2003, and it's still expanding. It's not yet complete. Israel's goal is to essentially make life as unbearable as possible for Palestinians, to get them to leave on their own accord. And if that's not possible, then they will forcibly and violently occupy their land. You can see an apartheid system of life under occupation where there's overt discrimination, and we'll see more of that as we carry on. The apartheid wall cuts Palestinians off from their agricultural land, from their communities, from their families, and from their businesses. And it is also illegal under international law. Since October 2023, there's been a massive increase in new obstacles added, which impede the movement for Palestinians. And there's something called a flying checkpoint, which essentially any Israeli soldier can decide that they want to create a checkpoint basically anywhere, and on a whim. and you're then subjected to having to show them your ID. Everywhere we traveled, we had to carry our IDs with us, our passports, and you know, it's pretty humiliating going through these checkpoints, I'll say. So here's some images of us driving up to a checkpoint. And then there are also these other checkpoints that you walk through. So on the right, there's an example of one that you might walk through. Your bags will be searched, your ID will be checked. Here's another example of a checkpoint. And Israeli soldiers, they also have these private security teams, and they will cause hours of delays. Sometimes it'll be 3 hours. Sometimes it could be even 9 hours of sitting at a checkpoint. For some individuals, they're literally sleeping at checkpoints. They also destroy personal items and fresh groceries. So, and they also cause direct and indirect deaths at checkpoints. Here's an example of a barrier. So you can see the cars are turning around, and this happened to us. We had to build in extra time for travel to compensate for these uncertain delays. In this picture, you can see a soldier standing at a checkpoint, and their M16 rifle is aimed at the cars passing through. And it takes a psychological toll to experience this multiple times daily while going to school, going to work, to visit family and friends, or to obtain medical care. And many Palestinian women, 30% of them, have lost their pregnancies due to these checkpoints, and patients have also died at these checkpoints. This is the Galkilia checkpoint, and it's one of the most deadliest checkpoints. Palestinians have died here. In February 2025, there's a 16-year-old Hamid Hamid Mohammed Fadel Nazil, who was killed at this checkpoint, according to DCI Palestine. In 2024, Israeli forces and settlers also killed at least 93 Palestinian children in the occupied West Bank. So every Israeli citizen is required to serve in the military, including those who are American citizens and have dual citizenship. And they use searches, intimidation, and delay tactics to cause psychological distress. Wearing hijab, I was the sole visibly Muslim delegate in my group, which made me a real easy target for harassment and discrimination because I was mistaken as Palestinian as I was traveling around in this delegation. So this picture of the soldier on the left, you could see him, and next to him is his security personnel. And these two individuals, they boarded our vehicle, and they immediately, they confiscated my passport. And they exited the vehicle. The security personnel, he mocked me, and when I questioned where he was taking my passport, because that's not something I was prepared for. They are not supposed to be able to take your passport off of your body. So that was a shock for me. And you can see there that he had pulled out his phone, and he was taking a picture of my passport, which I didn't know what he was going to do with. And he did that before it was returned to me. And I can say I was extremely angry at that point, and I really wanted to go after him and cause a scene. But I didn't. I had to kind of hold it in because there were Palestinians traveling with us. And if I caused any kind of a ruckus, it would be the Palestinians who would be suffering the consequences of that. And it just gave me a small taste of what it's like to be Palestinian and have to deal with that daily harassment and have to suppress your anger to make it through the day. I also think it's ludicrous that private security firms are hired to protect soldiers when they're fully armed. We traveled to Al Khalil, and It's located within the West Bank, and as part of the Hebron Protocol in 1997, it was split into two areas, H1 and H2. H2 is 20% of the city, and it's the most volatile area. It's under Israeli military control and Palestinian civil control. And it's heavily populated with Palestinians. There's 40,000 of them, and only 800 settlers. But most of these settlers are from the U.S. They're coming from Boston, they're coming from New York, and they're showing up and basically calling it their new home. The monitoring force, the civilian monitoring force, which was recording international human rights violations, was removed by Israel in 2019. So this is a picture of a checkpoint that we had to go through. The settler violence and military control, they work hand in hand, and they occupy Palestinian homes, and they search them, they occupy their other buildings as well, and there are numerous detentions and arrests. And, I want you to consider that school children are having to go through these checkpoints and face harassment and destruction of their property. So the Ibrahimi Mosque massacre was a really pivotal event in Al-Khalil. In '94, Baruch Goldstein, who's an American Israeli physician and ultra-Zionist settler, he carried out a mass shooting against 800 Palestinians, including children, while they were praying within the mosque. And, ironically, subsequently, the government then banned Palestinians from certain streets, such as Al-Shuhada Street. And even though there were Palestinian homes and there were Palestinian businesses, and they allowed exclusive access to Jewish Israelis and foreign tourists on those streets. So you can see us here walking by these shops, and you might notice that structure that's there above us. And that structure is there, the nets and the overhangs are there to protect Palestinians from the garbage, the sewage, and the acid that's thrown on them from Israeli settlers who occupy the homes above. In '94, the army closed down 304 shops and warehouses and occupied a number of buildings. They occupied the bus station as an army base. And here you can see how, some of the home entrances were completely sealed. And on the right, you can see Palestinian attempts at resistance through graffiti art. Here's another area that we were walking by, a check post right on the right at the very top there. You can see the check post, and there was an Israeli soldier who was at the top, and he was aiming his M16 down at us, and he told us not to take any pictures of their check posts, so we had to stop. But of course I took as many photos as I could. Here's another example of a checkpoint that we had to go through. And our guide, Mohammed, who's from the Al-Khalil area, he and I, being visibly Muslim, we had to go through this area, but we were not allowed in further after that. We weren't allowed entrance into the Jewish area, and we had to stop at the checkpoint. All the other delegates were let in. And I think that's just another example of how much they discriminate. It really doesn't matter if you're an American citizen and you're traveling there. You don't have any rights. If you are Muslim, they're, huge Islamophobes. So this is the street that I was not allowed access to, while the rest of the delegation was allowed to enter and walk through. And you can see on the right there, there's a settler with his family. And I invite you to consider the mental health impact on an Israeli child to grow up in an environment where there's normalization of being armed with M16 rifles during your daily life, and Palestinians are viewed as threats. In this image, you can see the sign, and it's an attempt to rewrite history. And, we saw these signs everywhere. As soon as you get to the as soon as you make it to the airport, you could see all these signs up where the Israeli government is trying to, I guess, manufacture a history based on what they want you to think is the reality. And of course, we know that is not the reality, and that is not a true history of Palestine. Since October 2023, incidents of Israeli violence, home demolitions, closure of schools and healthcare clinics increased. And I want you to just consider how damaging it is to one's mental health to not have access to education, employment, your daily needs, to healthcare. All of these things would lead to a loss of hope and despair. This is Isa Amro. He's the founder of Youth Against Settlements, which is one of the organizations that we met with while we were in Al Khalil. And he's a human rights activist. And if you want, you can take a picture of this slide and watch a short documentary about him and Al Khalil. This is Mohanad, who I mentioned earlier. He is a journalist and a sports commentator, and he's an activist with Youth Against Settlements. And he's the one who gave us a tour of Al Khalil, and he brought us to the Youth Against Settlements office where they hosted us for lunch. And right after we left, Mohanad was targeted and beaten by the soldiers. And we also saw footage of children that were screaming, that were running away through the streets as they were targeted with tear gas from Israeli tanks. To get to the Youth Against Settlements office, you walk up this hill, and it's a beautiful scene. You can see these 100 to 1,000-year-old olive trees that are still standing, and it's such a symbol of resistance. So in contrast to that, in the middle of lunch, unbeknownst to us, there were these two boys who were being roughed up by Israeli soldiers nearby. And we found out about it later after we had eaten. And, these boys were not fazed because this is such a norm for them in terms of their daily life, which is actually really sad if you consider that this is a norm for them. So this is our group with Youth Against Settlements, and this woman in a black hijab, she's the one who made our meal. And Youth Against Settlements hires local women to cook delegation meals as a means of income. In Al Khalil, there are so many women who have husbands and sons who are jailed or killed, and so they are left to, find means of income on their own. This woman had been beaten a week prior by soldiers and settlers that she knows, and her two brothers were previously murdered by Israel. And one of the things that Youth Against Settlements does is that they give phones to the youth, and it's so that they can document their realities living under occupation. And doing so helps them to feel a sense of agency to combat what they're experiencing on a daily basis. So we also visited Human Supporters Association in Nablus, which is a youth organization formed by paramedical workers. And their aim is to support children and teenagers who are impacted by trauma. And they have a number of programs that support them. Their office building has bullet holes from Israeli soldiers who are frequently raiding the area. And these soldiers sometimes dress up undercover in Arab attire. The organization's unable to make police reports because the police and the soldiers, they're all in collusion together. And there are also violent repercussions for making those reports. And those reports don't go anywhere. There's no justice. Like I said, the organization provides educational support through tutoring. They also have arts programs. They teach debke, which is the traditional Palestinian dance, and they also have a pottery class. So you can see here some of the pottery that they had created that they were showing us. And 40 days prior to our visit, the staff came to this office to work on poetry projects. And they experienced an Israeli raid in broad daylight. And they were therefore stuck in the office for hours because it was unsafe for them to leave. The man in the black sweatshirt, his name is Naif, and he's a staff member whose brother had been murdered by Israel during that recent raid. Medical attention was not allowed to reach him in time, and so he did pass. And the man next to him is Wajdi, and he had previously during a raid been shot in the legs, both of his legs. And he, of course, was not able to get justice for that. And he was shot by the Israelis. Wajdi took us through Nablus and gave us a tour of the city. And here you can see Nablus's water reserve, which was poisoned by Israel, and it led to mass illnesses. It really overwhelmed their healthcare system at the time. We also visited Al-Nasr Mosque, and a month prior to our visit, this was during Ramadan, soldiers stormed 8 mosques in Nablus, and they set this historic mosque on fire. And it was clear that it was them. It was filmed by security footage. And they also restricted access to firefighters to extinguish the blaze. And when we were there, we were witnessing how the community was coming together and rebuilding this masjid, this mosque, which is another form of community resistance. They continue to rebuild. We also visited UNRWA's girls' school in Nablus. This particular school is located in Balata refugee camp, and the classrooms are extremely overcrowded, and there's a shortage of teachers. And when we were visiting, they were telling us about how direly they need funds because UNRWA's funding had been cut. And the teachers continue to show up every day and teach, even though there is no certainty around compensation. And they do that because they're providing consistency for these students that are impacted by trauma, while they themselves are also impacted by that trauma. So there are frequent attacks by Israeli soldiers within the Balata refugee camp. And the school director had talked to us about an experience 4 to 5 days prior where they had raided and destroyed the homes overnight, including hers. And they arrested people and they remained present for 24 hours. So imagine like all those kids, they're not able to sleep, no one's able to sleep. And then the next day they're showing up at school. Which provides, support and consistency, but of course they have trouble with focusing and really taking in any of the lessons because they're impacted by this trauma. And based on a recent survey of their students, they found that 95% had had homes broken into by these soldiers. 88% had close relatives beaten by soldiers, and over half of them had witnessed arrest of family members. So the fact that the school provides therapeutic programs and support to students and families is really critical for this population. We took a tour through Balata refugee camp in Nablus. This is a camp that was established in 1950, and it was meant to be temporary. And of course, it hasn't been. Now it's grown to a population of 32,000, and over half of the population are underage. And employment has worsened since October 2023. And the alleys between the homes are extremely narrow, and they let in very little natural light. And there's, prevalency of health conditions like tuberculosis and asthma. And the homes are expanded upward because as the population grows, there's a need for increased housing, but there isn't the space for it. So now we're going to hear from Mariam Ajwa of the Yafa Cultural Center.
This one invasion. We know that in Balata we have the same destiny like other camps in Jenin and Tulkarem. that they will destroy many houses, and we're as if we're preparing ourselves for that. So look at these families who will leave their houses, where they will go with their poverty, with their kids, they have nothing to do with. Even they don't have the money to rent houses, they don't have money to even to own houses outside the camp. Beside the kids, we talked a little bit in the school about these effects on kids, not only on parents, also on kids, how they can be affected from all invasions that is happening during day and night. During the night, when they come, they start shooting, bombing. 2 days ago, the day before yesterday, it was 2 days ago, they entered to Joseph Tomb. Joseph Tomb, it's in Balata village. There is a tomb, they think that it's for their prophet Joseph. They are coming regularly, hundreds of settlers, not less than 5 to 6 buses, big buses with settlers, with the support of Jewish, with soldiers. They are bombing and exploding everything while they are coming. They come early, it's 9:30 in the evening till the morning. They come to pray and to do the religious things that they think that it's their prophet. When they came 2 days ago, they closed the whole gates surrounding the tomb. When we tried to move, it's the whole gates. It's closed by soils. We were waiting for the municipality of Nablus to come here and to remove this soil to let us pass. This is one of stories that we're having every day. About the effect of these things for kids, you cannot imagine. You can see and hear shouting of kids. They are crying because they saw many cases who were killed in front of their eyes. They cannot forget these scenes, of course. This trauma will stay until the death of their life.
So if you want to hear more from Mariam, there's also you can take a picture of the slide. Eyewitness Palestine has done a interview for her where they do virtual delegations, so you can tour these different places, different camps, different cities and villages within Palestine. So I would highly recommend checking that out. Within Nablus, there's the Jaffa Cultural Center, and the staff were really glad to meet with us, but the meetings also bring on fears of Israeli raids and kidnappings and assassination attempts. They've had experiences where individuals where Israeli security forces show up, pretending that they're journalists or, religious figures, and in fact, they're there to obviously cause harm. So it's a safety concern for them when they open themselves up to having delegations come and meet with them, and yet they still do it because they know that it's important for the truth to come out and to be shared with everyone. Since October 7th, we're one of the few groups that managed to meet with them, and soon after we left, Israel raided. They raided the camp. And they besieged homes, and they shot a teenager, and they kidnapped a couple of 2 brothers, I believe, as well. And so these sorts of raids do happen, and like I said, they risked a lot to meet with us, and so we're grateful that they did allow us to come in and observe and speak with them. So the Jaffa Cultural Center also has a healthcare clinic, and within that clinic they only have 1 doctor, and they found that whenever these raids occur, the residents, their blood pressure increases, their blood sugar levels also increase. And so this clinic has done an amazing job of conducting home visits after these raids. And when they do that, they are providing mental health and emotional support. And they found that when they measured and they monitored the blood pressure levels, it did actually decrease from doing these home visits. So it seems like it's really effective and important work that they're doing by conducting these home visits and supporting access for the residents there. They also trained to do first aid, and it was very eye-opening because they talked to us about how they're training children in schools to do first aid. And they're doing that because there are these frequent raids in the camp, and in case the children need to know how to support their family members, that's why they're teaching them first aid, which, when you think about that, it really it steals the childhood of these children. They don't get to have a normal, typical childhood where they get to play and not have a lot of worries. Instead, they're trying to prepare to treat the individuals in their family in case of a raid, which happens so frequently. So Yafa Cultural Center, they try to do a lot of programs to support children. They said the emphasis is of play as giving children the gift of life. They have a delegate team. They offer martial arts classes. They have a theater space, and they also support photography skills to help these children to experience some normalcy in their life and some hope in their life. And this is a picture of the martial arts students within the camp. This is the Aida refugee camp that we also visited. It's located near Bethlehem, and you'll see that it's surrounded by 7 watchtowers and also the apartheid wall. And there are drones that fly in from these towers and target children. So the Aida refugee camp, when we were touring it, we were told also, and we could see that an Israeli settlement had also taken over some of that land that was part of the refugee camp. Israel also controls the water supplies in the West Bank, and so it really restricts access for the residents, for the Palestinians. And these nearby Israeli settlements have unrestricted access and good quality water. After October 7th, Israel also forcibly displaced refugees from other camps and then caused them to move into Aida camp, which has caused more crowding. So what's the psychological impact? There's helplessness, there's fear, there's loss of previous dreams, there's a feeling of being betrayed by the world, and a narrow focus on survival. And we'll talk in the future about how Palestinians counter this, but it's through faith, through community healing practices, and international solidarity. So next we're going to play a video from Saeed, who was one of the members of the youth center that we met with. He's 27 years old, and he said before October 7th, his dream was to see the sea because he had never been able to because of these movement restrictions. And after October 7th, he says his dream is simply to survive.
If you look around you, around this camp, which is only 1,000, we are surrounded by 7 watching towers. This all apartheid wall around us. We feel that we are always watched, but we don't just feel that, because it's full of cameras. And this is another way to, control our mentality and to control us in different ways, to tell us that we are on your back every single time. So imagine that you live here in this house, you see this watching tower 3 meters away from your house. Imagine you are actually in your kitchen cooking and you're seeing that your enemy is always holding the gun, pointing at you. How come that you're going to just keep sane in this place? So last year, unfortunately, from this actual watching tower, this one in front of you, they brought a sniper and they shot a bullet inside the camp, and they killed a boy who was only 16 years old inside his home. What happened later? They left him bleeding because they said, we're going to treat him. We did this, we're going to treat him. They left him bleeding until he died. They got him, they took him to that military base. As you can see, this is military base. And they just, disappeared for 2 hours. After 2 hours, they called the family and said, sorry, we couldn't save him. Once we brought the body to the hospital, they said they didn't even stop the bleeding. They didn't even stop it. They didn't put any simple thing to stop the bleeding. And what happened to the killer of the child? We don't know what happened, of course. And what happened after? Absolutely nothing. That's the nothing that no, like, there is no, this is the whole world allowing this to happen to us. That's what I'm saying. In the past, I'm speaking about governments. We know that there is a difference between people and the governments as well. And in the past, I thought they are just like silent. Now, no, they're complicit. And you should know something. How everyone knows that we are occupied now by the United States of Israel. That's how we call it. We are being killed by the United States of Israel. We are being deprived from each right by the United States of Israel. We are actually in this situation because the United States is allowing this to happen. Not just allowing, it's supporting with all their heart. Every bullet that comes, it's USA bullets. We're gonna show you like the amount of bullets that we have down there, the tear gas, it's all written on it, USA. So how could you convince people here that they're not being killed by the US? How could convince them once they come and they say, we're gonna make Gaza, I don't know what, like a business thing, and a Rivera, whatever. How could you convince them that the world is trying to stand and bring their justice and also bring their rights? How could we believe anyone would offer us something? Absolutely, it's difficult. Back then, it was like, okay, like that, but at least it was hidden, But now it's completely like above the table. Everything happens as they're speaking about a series or a movie or I don't know.
So you heard from Saeed about the experience of the individuals in the refugee camp. I will put in a little plug and say that next Wednesday, Eyewitness Palestine is doing a online webinar and fundraiser for this camp. And they're trying to build like an olive grove and a playground area for the children. So if you're interested in supporting this camp, you're welcome to check out Eyewitness Palestine's webinar. That's will be next Wednesday. So the Ida Youth Center that he's part of, their programs focus on education, arts, and sports. And these programs allow these children to actually leave the camp and, travel out of the country, which they wouldn't even have the opportunity to do within their country. And this organization's also contributed medical treatment in Gaza and also in Egypt for displaced refugees. 2 months prior to our visit, the center was raided multiple times, and 10 of the staff were arrested. They were handcuffed, they were blindfolded and interrogated. And they don't let these things hold them back. They choose not to be intimidated. They continue doing this work, even though it causes a lot of risk for them because, they have no choice. They're trying to create a future for the youth and instill hope, and this is the way that they do it through these programs. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about illegal detainment, human rights violations against prisoners. Israel uses administrative detention, and it's a form of arbitrary detention of Palestinians across the occupied West Bank. They are not told why they are detained. There's no reason for them being detained. Even children are detained. No information is provided to their families. There's also attorneys, they have no legal representation, and they're coerced into signing these false statements that are written in Hebrew that they also can't understand. They're not translated into Arabic, and there's no translation provided to them. And they are shuffled from prison to prison, and the illegal, which is also a time that is incredibly risky for them during the transportation process. And the detainment can continue, for months, for years. It can be indefinite, and it is, extended arbitrarily without charge or trial. So Palestinians are illegally detained and psychologically, physically, and sexually abused. They're stripped, they're blindfolded, they're beaten in really sensitive areas like the head, with the intent to obviously cause, lasting harm. There's also evidence of rape that is documented, and they are confined to these small spaces and placed in isolation. Even children are placed in isolation. There also, there's collective punishment. They're cut off from water. Their electricity and water is cut off for many, many hours. They're forced to be placed in stress positions, and loud noise is played to inflict psychological suffering. And there's, of course, torture during these interrogations. They're urinated on. They're denied exercise. There's malnutrition, starvation. They're not given hygiene products, and there's a huge spread of illnesses like scabies, lice, and rashes. There's a report from Save the Children, which would be really, you can take a picture of the slide if you want, and it documents the impact of children in the West Bank who have experienced violent arrests or detention. Most of the time, this is happening at night, and there's physical and emotional abuse in detention and denial of the essential services. And of course, there's huge psychological impact on these children. DCIP is also a great organization to look at if you want to learn more about the statistics and the documentation of these violations. And they're the only children who are they're the only children in the world who are detained and subject to military courts. So we met with a couple of former political prisoners, and I was not allowed to take this individual's picture or videotape him because it would have posed a security risk for him. And so instead I summarized what he shared with us, which is that he was detained for 9 months for no reason, administrative detention, and he was isolated in this one room with 11 other people for 24/7, with no contact with the outside world. When new prisoners would come in, that's how they would learn what's happening on the outside. Otherwise, they were completely isolated. He lost 50 pounds. He was not given change of clothing or hygiene items, and there was also physical abuse, and dogs were unleashed on him and other prisoners. There's psychological torture that he experienced as well. And he said, these are his words. He said, either you will die in prison thinking about all the circumstances that you are living, or you have to face it and to encounter the circumstances of Israeli brutality and be stronger. The first week for me detained was the most difficult time in my life. But after 1 week, I had to make that decision that I have to be strong and resilient and encounter all this brutality. It wasn't easy to make this decision during this time, but it's the only way to face them, to encounter the Israeli brutality in all the circumstances. We also met with Palestinian Medical Relief Society in Ramallah, and Dr. Mustafa Barghouti is the head of PMRS. He's a Palestinian physician, an activist, and a politician. And he himself has been targeted 8 times with assassination attempts, and he shared with us about how in 1996 he was shot twice by an Israeli sniper in his back and his shoulder while he was wearing his white coat and he was treating an injured patient. PMRS has 80 medical teams that are working in Gaza, and he talked with us about healthcare workers, about how they're providing services, but they also have concerns around food scarcity, around shelter, and safety of their own families, but they continue to show up and treat patients who are going through the same trauma. And he talked about how Israel's committing 3 war crimes: genocide, ethnic cleansing, and collective punishment through blockading food, water, medication, and aid. And of course, it's been 3 months since I've returned, and in that time, we've seen that nothing has shifted. In fact, it's worsened, and we see this manufactured starvation happening, this forced starvation happening in Gaza, and we see our country, our government very much complicit in it. And Dr. Barghouti, he warned about how Israel was already starting this process in the West Bank at 3 camps, Tulkarem, Nur Shams, and Jenin, and thousands had already been displaced. And so as we went through West Bank, we kept hearing about, what's happening in Gaza as an accelerated ethnic cleansing and genocide. And in the West Bank, there's this very real fear from Palestinians that, as they're witnessing what's happening in Gaza, they are certain that they're going to be next. And Dr. Mustafa Barghouti talked about how what's happening in Gaza affects everyone in the world. He says it sends the message that there's no international law anymore and no human rights are respected. And in this next slide, we'll get to watch a video of him as he speaks to us about that.
So it's a difficult situation, it's a very painful situation, and as people we have only two options. Either we steadfast, remain in our country, struggle as much as we can to survive and stay and insist on our rights, or surrender and be displaced to other places. And I tell you, Palestinian people will not be broken. Never. We are so resilient. It's painful. We pay high prices. We risk our lives. We risk everything. But we cannot live as slaves. Neither in a system of apartheid, nor as displaced people without any rights. And this is what it is. It is about struggling against becoming slaves, struggling against slavery. And I think any person who has respect to human rights and respect to dignity of people would be with Palestinians. And look at your system. What's happening to the United States? They're punishing Harvard, for God's sake.
Yes, and Columbia.
Harvard, Columbia, Yale, all of them. This is an evil campaign. And we know exactly where that comes from. And we know all the terrible racist ideology that feeds such behavior. But it's definitely about the future of humanity and the future of all people in our world, not just Palestinians. What is the message? The message is that we, the Palestinians, should be accepted and treated as equal human beings. Nobody should allow this kind of discrimination against a whole people. We are like you. You have to explain to the Americans that Palestinians are like everybody else. They deserve freedom. They deserve their rights. They deserve equality. And it is important to show that this is a case of injustice. And the Palestinian struggle is about struggling for justice, exactly like was the African American struggle for justice and for equality and against racism. Exactly like what Martin Luther King struggled for. Exactly like what Americans demanded from Britain when they conducted a war of independence to achieve independence. And please clarify to the people the scope of the atrocity. 90,000 tons of explosives were thrown on Gaza, most of which came from the United States of America. And last night, 5 huge American airplanes landed in Israel, bringing even more ammunition, more powerful ammunitions. 90,000 tons of explosives, it's 40 kilograms of explosives for each man, woman, and child in Palestine, in Gaza.
I think for me, hearing him talk about the 90,000 tons of explosives and how these planes had just landed with more ammunition, I think for me, that was one of the most painful things to hear, and the times when I felt the most ashamed of being American and what our country is doing. So we're going to switch gears now, and we're going to move into resistance and resilience. And we'll look at how Palestinians combat all of this oppression of occupation. Faith is foremost. Both Christian and Muslim Palestinians turn to their faith as a means of coping. And as Muslims, they have the concept of tawakkul Allah, which is complete reliance and trust in Allah. And but it also includes action, not being passive. And for Christians and Muslims, there's the belief in an afterlife, which is, I think, especially comforting when you consider what's happening in Gaza when these children are basically ripped apart, their bodies are ripped apart, and the idea that there's an afterlife where their bodies will be intact and in beautiful states is really, really important, and it creates, I think, a sense of I think, hope, and also it can help to combat that grief. And also for Muslims, there's the concept of justice, the idea that if justice is not served in this world, that there will be justice in that next world. There's also the concept of martyrship, which is an elevated status for Muslims. And here you can see the Dome of the Rock in Al-Aqsa compound. Engaging in prayers individually and in community facilitates comfort, strength, and hope. We also met with Reverend Munther Isaac, and in December 2023, he said, Christmas is canceled, and his church's nativity scene depicting Jesus lying on a pile of rubble went viral. And he's been very critical of the Israeli government's treatment of Palestinians and also Christian Zionist support for Israel. And I would highly recommend reading his new book that just came out. So Samud, community programs, and mental health services. These are other ways of resisting and showing resilience. So after October 7th, those events impacted 90% of Palestinians in Israel. They needed mental health treatment and they failed to receive it. So the Mana Center is trying to combat that by training more Arabic-speaking Palestinian psychotherapists, because there is a shortage of Arabic-speaking therapists, and currently there's a 6.5-month wait list. And therapists talked there. We went to a few different mental health sites, and the therapists talked about how the P and PTSD is a privilege, that they don't have the privilege of a post, that the trauma and the occupation is ongoing, and so they don't even have a chance to kind of take a break from it and address the trauma because it's ongoing for everyone. Samud is the concept of steadfastness or persistence, and it's a collective and individual determination and action to resist occupation and maintain Palestinian presence, identity, and connection to the land. So it's very integral to Palestinians when we talk about resistance and resilience. And in this next video I'll show you, we'll hear from Dr. Samat Jaber, who's a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist, and a writer in Jerusalem. And she talks about how it's healing to write these micro stories, and how discussing the trauma and validating the context that the individual is in, the context of occupation, is vital to providing treatment to the Palestinians there, that the environment is a traumatic environment. And then she also asserts that the shame belongs to the perpetrators rather than the Palestinians. So we'll hear from her in this next video.
If we don't challenge them, they will be the history for the future. And this is much of our history has been falsified. So we understand that we need to contribute effectively to writing our own history. Usually, Palestinian people are capable of writing their micro stories because we don't have influence on mainstream media and big academia to write history. Those mainstream institutions usually help the powerful, not ordinary people. Our awareness of the importance of contributing to the history and writing the history makes us keen on collecting the micro stories. And that's why we see many ordinary individuals, sometimes adolescents, sometimes young people, who don't have any experience with journalism, who are not academics. They use their mobile to report a story, to tell a story. They're part of truth. And I think this is very important, and this is how we can be the protagonists of our own story. So that's an example of being inspired by this part, the retrieval of history from liberation psychology and its applicability in the Palestinian situation. But also conscientization, being politically conscious and aware of what's going on. And this is an intervention that is important in my clinical practice. Sometimes I think that it is important to tell the people that the illness is not in your mind, it's in our reality. It makes a difference. When people are experience humiliation and oppression, and often they feel ashamed of telling the details of what happened to them. When we help them realize that the shame belongs to the perpetrator, not to them, I think this can be liberating for some
So
people.
you heard there from Dr. Samat Jabbar. She talks about microstories, and she also brought up liberation psychology, which also looks at context and in treating individuals. So since October 7th, the Palestinian Counseling Center, also known as AACE, they've seen an increase in children's panic attacks and symbolic play of soldier versus Palestinian and throwing down of bombs. And for everyone there, there's this psychological warfare of being surveilled at all times. And when we visited the center, the therapists there, they talked about how they're going through the trauma as they're also meeting with their clients and trying to support them with their own healing. And there are a lot of barriers there. I think they talked about how when clients come to their center to receive services, even as they're trying to come to heal some of that trauma and address it, they're experiencing trauma on their way, because they're getting harassed by soldiers as they're trying to make it to the center, or they're harassed on the way home from the center. And so, that trauma is ongoing, but they're doing what they can to combat it through play therapy, art therapy, narrative therapy, liberation psychology, smooth, and these cultural community programs, psychosocial support programs. And we talked about this before, that these community programs are really critical. They instill hope in the children. Mahmoud Muna, who's the owner of an educational bookshop in Jerusalem, he said on hope is our life. We cultivate hope. We plant it and wait for it to grow. So I think that's a beautiful example of how these programs are a way of cultivating hope for these children and to support them and to help them grow into a future that is hopefully different than what they're currently experiencing. So resistance and resilience is also shown through mourning and memorialization. Collective grief is something that we saw quite a bit as we traveled through the West Bank. And here you see Ramallah Martyrs Memorial. Here we see a photo on the left of, these photos are hung up and they're displayed of the deceased as a form of memorialization. So on the left, this was at the Youth Against Settlements office, and this is Hadil, and she was murdered at 18 at a checkpoint. And so she's commemorated there. Here we see it with the apartheid wall in Bethlehem. We see a mural of Palestinian American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh and she was killed by an Israeli sniper while wearing her blue vest, her press vest, and covering a raid. And you can see journalists were being shot while covering raids in the West Bank even prior to October 7th, although it's much more intense now, along with doctors and any aid workers. So this is not a new practice for Israel, and this mural serves as a way of honoring and keeping alive the memory of Palestinian American Shereen Abu Akleh. Here we can see in Bethlehem and in Nablus that there are these photos and murals of martyrs displayed as memorialization, or individuals who were forcibly displaced. So international solidarity. What is the role of international solidarity? How does it help Palestinians with resistance and resilience? Palestinian voices remain suppressed by Israel, and which is why international solidarity is so important in terms of mental health and also human rights. When international healthcare workers enter Palestine, they're providing direct assistance and much needed support towards survival. The protests that are all over the world, Palestinians view them, and it really does combat their sense of isolation and fear that they're forgotten by the world. And they mentioned that a lot, that they were really appreciative of all these, these protests. And the delegations, I think, are really critical. They allow Palestinians to tell their stories, to be witnessed, to feel empowered and less isolated, and to have hope that their messages are going to be amplified by the delegates, that they won't be silenced, and that the truth will be known about what they're experiencing on a daily life under occupation. There's also resistance to erasure through legal cases. There are foundations, there are legal rights organizations, and they, work to preserve these historical and religious structures. We see this in Al-Abbasiyah, the mosque there. They fight against illegal detainment, and they document human rights violations and war crimes. And these organizations are actually targeted a lot by Israel, because of the fact that they are doing the really important work to document the war crimes and to try to provide support to detainees. Resistance to erasure is also shown through art. So you see that with graffiti art, you see that with murals, nationalistic songs, music, and you see it with dabke, the ethnic dance. Resistance to erasure is also shown through connection to the land and food. So Palestinians maintain harvesting their crops, even though there are a number of extreme barriers to doing so, and also puts their lives at risk. They use traditional practices and traditional herbs, and they fight against cultural appropriation of their food. There's resistance to erasure through continued existence in the spaces that Israel seeks to remove them from. So Tantura, we talked about the fishing village at the beginning of the presentation. There's also something called the absentee property law, which, if you leave your property for a certain period of time, then Israel will just take over your land. And so those in East Jerusalem are contending with this constantly. They are not given permits. It takes them maybe 15 years to get permit approval to build their home. So of course they end up just building their home, and then Israel says, you did it without a permit, and you need to destroy your home. Either you're going to do it, or we're going to do it for you, and you're going to pay us. They will fine them. So they will tell them to pay us, and we will destroy your home, or you have to destroy it yourself, which is an incredibly traumatic experience for Palestinians. But they continue to rebuild. If Palestinians do leave Palestine, they donate the land in Jerusalem to schools so that it preserves Palestinian ownership and use of the land. And they also build homes on top of the mosques because it's considered illegal to demolish these homes. And, they will reside in trailers. We did see some trailers there. They'll do whatever it takes to ensure that they don't lose their land. There's resistance to erasure through oral tradition, identification with one's home, even if it's physically destroyed, and one's right of return. So if you speak to any youth in these refugee camps, they're not going to say they're from the camp. They're going to name the original village, their grandfather or grandmother's village, even if that village is destroyed or has been renamed. There's resistance to erasure through attire. So there's the kafia, the traditional scarf that is a symbol of resistance. And there's tatris, traditional embroidery that's taught and passed down, and also jewelry. So I mentioned at the beginning that this trip was also very personal for me. I didn't really talk much about why I went on the trip. I went on this trip because as a psychotherapist, a third of my clients are Palestinian Americans. And a year into the genocide, I just found myself feeling like, I don't know, having doubts about the efficacy of my advocacy work. And, I wanted to go and visit with Palestinians and learn from them and hear from them what they wanted us to do, not to make assumptions and try to act on that. And so I went to learn. I went to connect. I felt like I could serve my clients better if I went to Palestine and I learned from psychotherapists there. And I would have a better idea of their roots, the context. And then I also went because of personal reasons. I'm married to a Palestinian American. And it was a very emotional experience for me. The night I landed in Palestine, I told my family I made it safe and sound, and it was a very naturally it was very anxiety provoking for everyone, my family especially, and I left behind my 2 young kids. They're very young, and so one of the things that stood out to me was that my father-in-law messaged me and he said, "Welcome home." And when we're the land, how do I explain this? So the airport that we landed in is located on part of my father-in-law, his father's land. And so I was literally landing on their land that is occupied, part of which is now the airport. So I'm going to read to you my personal reflections, because when I was leaving Palestine on that last day, I didn't want to leave, which is saying a lot because I left my family to go, but I just did not want to leave. So I'm going to read a little bit about this. I said, "I'm filled with so many emotions: grief, anger, disbelief, hope, and deep gratitude. Each day here has been moving and overwhelming. I've met people risking their lives daily to do incredible work, and I'm so thankful for the chance to witness that. And I don't feel ready to leave. I've become more aware of the growing restrictions, safety concerns, and logistical hurdles. Even so, I believe in the steadfast of Palestinians, that despite being fragmented by occupation, they remain united in their cultural identity and longing for liberation. And this experience has changed me. I don't think I can go back to life as it was. I now feel an even deeper responsibility to speak up, and I'm now better equipped with connections and clarity to contribute in a meaningful way, inshallah. And I've been holding on to the beauty of Palestine, the landscapes, the cities, the scents, the history underfoot, and I've thought often about my husband's family, mourning what's been lost and still hoping for a future where we can build a home here, or at least visit freely and connect more deeply with my children's ancestral lands. And there's still so much to process. I've cried every single day, and I'm still unpacking it all. And I think I'm still unpacking it 3 months later. I know we have to end very soon. I just want to share these final words about the importance of action. And this is from the former political prisoner that I had referenced earlier, who had been detained for 9 months. He said, "Palestine will be free and your actions matter." He said, "One day Palestine will be free. Colonialist days are numbered. Until then, every activist, every voice raised in solidarity plays a crucial role in this struggle. Be proud of what you're doing, boycotting complicit corporations, amplifying Palestinian voices, disrupting the Zionist narrative, pressuring governments to act, demanding freedom, not just peace. This is how we make life harder for Zionists and easier for Palestinians. One day you'll tell the story of how you stood on the right side of history. You'll tell your children, your grandchildren, that when the world watched a genocide unfold, you refused to stay silent, that you fought with your words, your actions, your rage, and your beliefs. Freedom is inevitable. Don't get tired and show them your anger. So I think that's a good way to end, is thinking about his words and thinking about action and thinking about next steps. And there are a number of things that he named in there already. But joining the BDS movement, hosting educational events, staying engaged, writing to your elected representatives, asking for an arms embargo, a boycott, and all of those things. Volunteering for future delegations, whether they're medical missions or just regular delegations. Eyewitness Palestine and USA Palestine Mental Health do provide, they host these delegations. Organizing, demonstrating in solidarity is really important. And then donating to these human rights organizations, medical relief and aid, and community organizations. And a number of them I named in here, but if you have questions, feel free to contact me, and I'd be happy to share more with you if you'd like.
Thank you so much for sharing all this information. It's nice to know that we have someone in the Bay Area that can inform of what's happening today with Palestinians. My question is, there are a lot of organizations now that are trying to help the Palestinians, but as we can see, the Israeli government is making it harder and harder and making stricter regulations and rules just for Palestinians in general. So how are they getting necessities to the Palestinians?
Yeah, I mean, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So Gaza, as we know, has had, it's been blockaded for, almost 20 years at this point. And so, they've created their own partnerships and they found ways around that. And these organizations that I spoke about, they have connections. And, we didn't always get into all the details, but they clearly are providing support. And that support is risky for them, particularly if they're in the occupied Palestine areas known in Israel. They are putting themselves at risk, even if, as a psychotherapist, they're trying to provide psychotherapy to support to someone in Gaza. And yet they continue to do so. I don't know if this helps, but there's an article here, the bottom here, Counterpunch article that just came out with by Dr. Yasser Abu Jameh, and he talks about providing psychotherapy in Gaza while he's also living the same genocide that everybody else is going through. And it's a really great article to check out. But to answer your question, they have connections with people outside of Gaza, and they have ways of providing ongoing support. And there are organizations here that you can donate to continue that support. There are also organizations that do like mutual aid, like fundraisers, webinars that you can contribute towards. Mecca is a great organization, Eyewitness Palestine. And so they have these contacts that they've maintained over decades with actual Palestinians there who do a lot of the work there. Yeah, but it's a good question because it's challenging to know, where to put your efforts. You want to donate, but you also want to make sure that it's going to actually make it into Gaza and support the Palestinians there. And also with the West Bank as well, it can be challenging, but there are definitely ways of supporting the folks there.
How has your experience as a therapist influenced how you viewed the situation in Gaza?
Oh, that's a very broad question and a good question. That's a really hard question for me. That's very broad. There's how I view it as an individual, a human being. There's how I view it as somebody with Palestinian family. There's how I view it as an American, knowing we're deeply complicit that our tax funds are going towards a genocide. There's how I view it as a psychotherapist, thinking about the psychological toll of this genocide. So it's a very complex question, and I'm sorry I can't go deeper into it. For me, it was a good experience to go on the delegation with other psychotherapists because it was intense. We would spend 12, 13 hours each day visiting all these different sites and with these people, and it was exhausting for sure. But it was also a good experience being in community with all the other delegates because it provided a level of support to process what we were witnessing. And I would say every individual on the delegation was having, their own unique experience on the delegation. So we certainly had a lot of rich discussions, and there was a lot of support provided. I certainly appreciated a lot of support that was provided to me from the organizers of the delegation because it was challenging being somebody who would usually was the first to get targeted from the group of the delegates. There were moments that I felt really scared, unsafe, and on edge, and I found myself thinking, like, what is it like for the Palestinian people? Because this is their norm. Every single day they have to contend with this. I don't know how they're staying so strong and resilient. And I think this presentation kind of gets into that. They look to community, they look to their roots, their culture, sumud, like all the support that they provide each other to continue to stay strong. So I greatly admire them.
Thanks, Shereen. This is a question from one of the Instagram viewers tonight. Mm-hmm. At any point, did you come across Israeli, not non-Palestinian people, who showed you respect or kindness despite your Muslim appearance?
No. I mean, I wish I could say yes, but no. Every single and this was the crazy thing about being there. There's a level of arrogance that Israelis have as they're walking this land that is an ancestral land for Palestinians, and they walk on the land with such arrogance, and they interact there's different ways they interact. They will act violent and aggressive towards Palestinians and others who they perceive as Palestinian. They act entitled. Or they just ignore you. They pretend you don't even exist. And, I think that's another way that they try to get to you psychologically. I was really taken aback when we were on the bus and one of the soldiers came up with the other guy I showed you a picture of. And, these soldiers, they're supposed to look at your ID. Everyone's holding up their ID to show them. And it's humiliating, and it's kind of scary, and it's intimidating. They're walking through with their huge M16s right next to your face, and they don't look at you. So if I was looking at the soldier and I'm saying, where are you taking my passport? He didn't even look at me or acknowledge my question. And so it's dehumanizing. They treat you like you're not human. It doesn't matter if you're Palestinian or not. It doesn't matter if you're an American citizen. If you are not Israeli, you shouldn't exist on that land. It was surprising. I mean, I wish I could say that I had some positive experiences with Israelis there. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some Israelis who are, supporting some Palestinians or trying to, protest or refusing to serve. There are Israelis doing that. I just did not meet them. And I wish that Israel was not suppressing their voices, because those are the voices that need to be heard.
So I have a question for you, Shereen. You mentioned MENA, I think, and how they're struggling finding Arabic-speaking psychotherapists. Is there a demand for Arabic-speaking psychotherapists who are not living in Palestine to sort of support Palestinians?
There is an effort to. So I actually asked Dr. Samad Jabbar this question because I felt conflicted myself. Like, should I provide psychotherapy to someone in Gaza or not? And it's a complicated question because there are obviously licensing rules that we all have to consider as psychotherapists. However, there's also an issue of, as a non-Palestinian or a Palestinian American or someone in diaspora who's a psychotherapist, are you the best person to provide that psychotherapy service? And I think the priority is that those in Palestine who are psychotherapists are the best equipped to do so. And if they're not able to, serve, because there's a high need, then, what I heard from Dr. Samad Jabbar was that it would be fine for folks from abroad to provide the psychotherapy service as long as they're well trained and as long as they're getting consultation and supervision from the Palestinian psychotherapists there. And Dr. Samad Jabbar does actually provide consultation to psychotherapists here who do serve Palestinians in Palestine. And there are organizations like Heal Palestine, I believe, that has been asking therapists here to provide support, and they provide translators to address the language barrier.
Sorry. I just was really curious. I mean, thank you for putting the presentation together. It's really remarkable how you were able to put all of that together. And so the only thing that I was wondering about was actually in regards to Palestinian Authority, if you had seen them, and also, like, I think just wondering about in your travels in the West Bank, if you had noticed a difference in status or I suppose like class in Ramallah especially, as opposed to the other cities in the West Bank.
Yeah. I mean, I can't really speak to the issue of class and that piece. We did visit Ramallah, but it wasn't for very long, and we did get to explore a little bit. So I can't really answer that piece around class. However, I will say that when we were in the areas that the Palestinian Authority control or serve, it was a completely different feeling. I think Ramallah was the place where I felt the most relaxed, like I could let my guard down and I was safe, And of course, that's kind of a mirage because, as we know, the settlers are taking over the West Bank. The soldiers show up in the West Bank and cause, a lot of harm, including death. So it's a bit of a mirage, but it felt like a reprieve from being in other areas of occupied Palestine, where everywhere you looked, it was military presence, Israeli presence. The Palestinian Authority, I did see them, in Ramallah and other areas. There are mixed feelings, I think, about them and their ability to, serve the Palestinian people. And there are also restrictions. I think in Al Khalil, for example, the taxes get paid to the Palestinian Authority, but then the Palestinian Authority has to turn it over to Israel. And then Israel decides what they want to keep, and they give the rest to the Palestinian Authority. And so there's still, you still see the oppression and the power and the hierarchy there, the control there. And I think since October 7th, those taxes aren't even going back to the Palestinian Authority. So there are some very clear limitations there. But I think for me personally, Ramallah felt like maybe the closest to what Palestine might have been had there not been an occupation. And also Akka. Akka is an area that, it is very touristy. And so there is that element, but it's just a completely different way that people show up and live their life. Akka, and that was, I think, the weird thing about this trip. Like, you would go from one place to the next place, and you wouldn't be like mentally prepared that in these different areas, there's like a different set of rules and hierarchy and rights and a different level of ease in these environments. So it was very disjointing going from place to place and not quite knowing if you're safe or not, like how do you act, like the military presence though, every time I was in Israeli areas, the occupied Palestine areas, like I could never relax. I was always on edge. And everywhere you looked, they had their flags and multiple flags in like one area. And I was mentioning earlier, I just felt like they're so insecure that they have to place their flag up, not just one time, but like multiple times every few feet to remind themselves, I guess, that it's Israel. But we all know it's Palestine. So it's a weird experience traveling and seeing the different areas. I hope I answered that. I'm kind of all over the place.
Thank you so much again for sharing, and we're just so glad you made it back safe and sound and have been sharing your experiences. You mentioned that one of the reasons you went was to inform your own practice. So I was curious of how the trip has shaped your therapy practice since, and then just how it's, changed or shaped you generally as a human being afterwards.
Yeah. So when my Palestinian American clients talk about their roots, like where their parents are from or their grandparents are from, I can now say, I visited your place. I visited that place, or I know that area, or I know I've experienced it. And sometimes I feel a bit guilty because they themselves have not had the opportunity. And so sometimes I feel like it's a weird feeling of like, I got this experience, I'm grateful for it, and they're robbed of that experience of being able to go home and experience home like they should. And so it does come up in that way where I feel more familiar with Palestine. And so when there are references made to Palestine, I can say like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about, or I witnessed that, or I experienced that. Or if I have a client who, for example, is planning to travel to Palestine and they have concerns around, safety or different processes because it is extremely anxiety provoking and can bring up trauma responses in an individual when they're trying to travel to Palestine or come back from Palestine or be in Palestine, then it helps me to be able to prepare them for that journey, to help them kind of walk through what to expect as they make this journey to Palestine, whether it's for the first time or subsequent times. And I can give them more up-to-date information about what's actually happening in Palestine and what to expect. So that preparedness is extremely important because it's not just about logistics, it's the mental preparation that has to take place. If I have a client who has a trauma history, inevitably some of those trauma symptoms are going to arise again as they're experiencing a return to Palestine or coming back from Palestine or while being in Palestine. And I should say, like for some of them who have left Palestine, they did experience trauma at the hands of Israeli soldiers. And so they're returning to a place where they experienced that trauma. And so there's a lot of work we have to do to prepare for that. And it's helpful for me to have a clear sense of what they're going to be contending with so that I can address it in the sessions and they can be prepared mentally and also logistically. Yeah. How has it changed me as a person? There's just so much there, and it's been 3 months. I'm still processing it. I can tell you that even before visiting, every day I was thinking about Palestine, and it felt like heavy grief within our household. And that was one of the things that kind of pushed me to go, because I just could not stand just watching everything and not being able to do anything. And for me, I felt like that was my way of showing some agency for myself, was to go and to experience and witness and come back and to be able to share it with others here. Because if you talk about Palestine, Zionists will inevitably say like, oh, that's a lie. But me saying, no, I actually was there 3 months ago, and this is what I witnessed, they can't really argue with that. You know, and so for me, it's been empowering to go. It's been very moving. I've maintained connection with many of the people that I met with there. I'm so grateful for them that they, you know, shared, despite it being a risk for them and despite it being so challenging for them. So I'm really grateful, and I've maintained those connections, and I hope to continue that. It helps me feel like I have kind of a direction in terms of advocacy work, projects that I could donate towards that would make a concrete difference in the lives of the children in the refugee camps, for example. Yeah, I think, I don't know, there's a lot there I'm still unpacking. I don't regret it for an instant. And I definitely want to go back. And I hope to, inshallah, next time go back with my whole family. Like I'm really longing for that return. And I didn't expect that, because, you know, it's not my homeland. And now it feels like it kind of is. It's certainly my children's homeland and my husband's homeland. And so I feel this deep connection. And growing up, I was always, advocating for Palestine, but it's a whole other experience when you get to go there and you get to visit these areas and you get to hear the stories and know the people and eat the food and walk the land. It is just, you cannot. When I was leaving Palestine, you know, I had a lot of anxiety about, like, how was I going to get through the airport? And they had taken my picture on my passport. Like, what were they going to do with it? And of course, I did get, tagged, screened as a threat. And so I got a lot of extra security attention and harassment on my way out. But I didn't care, because I was just happy that I had this experience and I felt empowered. Like, I could sit there and be like, well, you can't take this experience away from me. You know, I've seen my husband's village. And even that was not something I expected going into the delegation. I was really grateful that they created that opportunity for me and for other delegates too. But, you know, I felt empowered. I could face those soldiers and just not feel disempowered, because they couldn't take this experience away from me. And it didn't matter if they were, harassing me or humiliating me. I knew I would get through it. I'd at least gotten in. My biggest fear was, are they going to let me in? Because I didn't know if I'd get in. And they do often deport people, and they have to go back and you're not let in. So, yeah, I'm grateful for the experience, and it's definitely changed me and changed how I look at the world, for sure.
So hopefully I'm not mistaken, but earlier in your speech, you said one of the reasons why you went to Palestine is to figure out what the Palestinians want and how they want us to approach this. So what was the response? How do they want us to help them? And how can we spread awareness appropriately in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest call to action was to do advocacy work, to talk to the representatives, to, try to create political change. And the biggest issue is needing to stop the genocide, because they can't rebuild They can't do much of anything if the genocide continues to happen, if our government continues to arm Israel and continues to be complicit, continues to fund this genocide. And so that was their main ask, was to, engage in advocacy, to put down some political pressure, to try to get the U.S.'s funding of this genocide to end. And they asked everyone to come and visit. They just were really welcoming, and they want more people to come to Palestine. They want to share their stories. They want everyone to see with their own eyes and experience what it's like. So that was the other ask. It was about, political advocacy, and continuing to, protest, but in an impactful manner, but also visiting and supporting their organizations that are doing really great work.
Thank you so much for all the details. I would like to know if other people want to join the, delegation or would like to contribute. What's the way to reach out to the group or?
Yeah, you mean to join the delegation itself or to support?
Yes, to go and support, just like you did.
To go.
Right.
So Eyewitness Palestine, I have the websites here. Eyewitness Palestine continuously puts on delegations, and they do in-person delegations every year, as well as virtual delegations online for those who can't go in person. But they coordinate these delegations, and they usually occur 2 or 3 times a year. And they're incredibly experienced. They've been doing this for over 20 years. And I can attest to how well they organized all of this. If you went to Palestine on your own, you would not get this kind of an experience. You would get the experience of being a tourist and seeing what, Israel wants you to see. And unless you're, engaging with the Palestinian people who can show you otherwise. So if you don't have connections there, then you should go with a delegation, because they have those connections and they can really show you around and coordinate all the logistics and support that you'll need. And they did prepare us very well. I applied for this a year into the genocide, so it was fall of 2024, and we went through a process of interviewing and being checked out and meeting with them and talking about it. They put on orientations to prepare us as well. So if you're interested, I think they have one in October or November, another one in December, and then USA Palestine Mental Health. They are planning a delegation in, I believe, 2027. That's going to be their next one. So that's another opportunity, particularly if you're a psychotherapist, you might want to go with that organization. And for our delegation, both of them work together to coordinate it. And I think there are some other organizations also that provide delegations. I do want to emphasize, when we hear about delegations, we think about medical delegations to Gaza, and there are other types of delegations. There are people who go to the West Bank and they provide services for a short time and then they leave. And so there are ways of going there and providing support, whether it's one-time support or consistent ongoing support, and being more involved there.
Not a psychotherapist, but like myself, I'm an education teacher at the university. Yeah. How could I contribute my skills, my knowledge, and
I think there's a lot that you could contribute, and there are also a lot of academics in Palestine that would probably love to meet with you and talk with you more. Eyewitness Palestine's delegations are sometimes they're themed, like the one we went on was for it was a mental health delegation and human services workers joined us, but they're not always themed. So I think in December they have a general delegation for anybody.
And it's for a few weeks. Like,
This was for, I think it was 11 days.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was 11 days and it felt like 3 months. Yeah. Any other questions?
Do we have any online questions? No. Okay. Last chance. No. Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much for this, and we really appreciate you giving this talk.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you again.